Hey everyone, before you watch this video, just wanted to do a little disclaimer. So in this video, I'm going to go after the ESV Bible pretty bad. And what I wanted to say before you watch the video about that is that while I am someone who takes the egalitarian point of view of Scripture, I have no problem with people who are complementarian. I have no problem with people who read the Bible that way. I don't even have a problem with the fact that the translators of the ESV Bible were complementarian. What I do take issue with is when the translators of a Bible take their theology into the translation of the text and make the text bend towards their theology instead of translating the text and then seeing, okay, what is my theology, or how does my theology and the text mesh, or how do they butt heads? When you overlay your theology, when you're a translator of the Bible and you are translating it for the mass amount of people, it's, to me, very disingenuous to bend that text to your will, to do what you want it to do versus what it says. That's what I'm going to take issue with in this video. So I'm not taking issue with people who are complementarian. I'm taking issue with what they did to translate the ESV Bible. All right, now watch the video. Hey everybody, and my name's Sam. I am a student of the Bible. I am a pastor. I've been a pastor for 22 years, and I have a decent grasp on biblical languages, and I write on my blog. And the chances that you're either seeing this on YouTube or my blog is because you either know me in person or part of our church or some kind of a connection that way. If you don't know who I am, that's why I just kind of told you all those things so you can know why I'm posting the way I am. So I want to kind of do part 2 of the video that I did yesterday where I talked about, okay, so what kind of version should I use? I get that question a lot. And yesterday I talked a lot about 3 specific translations. I called them interpretations of the Bible because, and maybe unfairly so, and I want to expound on some of that. So I talked about the NASB, the ESV, and the CSB, the New American Standard, English Standard Version, and the Christian Standard Bible. And I want to kind of expound a little bit upon why I make the comments that I do about those, and maybe do some clarifying, okay? So the first one I want to talk about is the CSB. So this is my only copy of the Christian Standard Bible. They came out with this, I forget the exact date, but it was probably 2013, 2014, somewhere around there. And they gave these Bibles away for us to look at them. They're like, hey, we're starting this. This is the update to the Holman Standard Bible. So they called it the Christian Standard Bible. I think they were trying to get some traction with that. So I got a free copy of it, like a bunch of us did. And I guarantee I just looked through like 3 or 4 different passages that I normally do to kind of see how they're translating. And I got to say, I was just not very impressed with some of the translations from the Greek. And so I kind of just went, dismissed it and put it on the shelf and haven't looked at it since then. So here's my take on it. I don't really have a lot of positive or negative things to say about the CSB. I just don't use it. I don't really reference it. The things that I have looked at in it, I wasn't too impressed by. So that's kind of my stance on it. So if you love the Christian Standard Bible, I don't really have an opinion one way or another on it. To be honest, I haven't really looked at it that deeply. So yesterday when I'm like kind of going, why did they do that in the translation there? It was my honest response because I've never really looked into that verse in that translation. So I was surprised. So that was my honest response to how they translated that verse. So I don't really have an opinion on this one that much. Now, NASB and ESV, I have a lot of opinions on. So I want to give a disclaimer right here at the front. I do not hate the NASB Bible. I actually love it for a lot of reasons. And a lot of it is the history behind the NASB, how it came to be. I don't always agree with how they translate things. In fact, a lot of times I think they compromised on some things, and the reason is because of how they translated it and who translated it. And so I'll get to that at the end of this video. But I don't actually hate this version of the Bible. I don't loathe it. I don't think it's terrible. I actually, in college, it's the Bible that I use, the NASB. I used it for a long time, and it's one that I still have on my shelf today and I reference a lot. So just know that, okay? I do disagree with it sometimes, and how they translated certain words, certain phrases from the Greek. But for the most part, I think it's really a really good translation. And so my breathing yesterday in the video was just a frustration with why did you translate it that way? It could have been better. Okay. Now, ESV, here's the deal. And I want to talk about the history of the ESV so you can understand why I don't really love it. And I think there's some problems with it. And I think it's a little disingenuous how they translate. So here's the history of the ESV. Okay. So back in the 90s, the mid 90s, Zondervan, who puts out the NIV Bible, was going to come out with they were going to publish a version of the Bible that was very gender neutral. This is well published all over the place. You can go and Google it, you'll find it. They were going to put out a version of the Bible that was very gender neutral, treated a lot of the gendered words like brothers, like adelphoi, like we talked about in the video yesterday, as brothers and sisters or something like that. Zondervan was going to publish this in the mid 90s. Well, there was a group of very conservative, fundamentalist, evangelical pastors and leaders who did not like that at all. They were like, no, you cannot do that. And so what they did was they all gathered together in Colorado Springs and they were like, what can we do about this? They wrote like a scathing remark about it, review about it, and how that we were losing the genderedness of the Bible, that it was turning into this feminist thing. And so they were very upset about it. And so Zondervan backed off. And what they did instead of just being okay with that, they decided that they were going to double down and they were going to translate, or they were going to take the RSV, the Revised Standard Version, they were going to update it, retranslate it, and come out with a new translation that was doubled down on this gendered thing. And so what they did was they came up with the ESV Bible. And I think it was like 2003, 2004, somewhere around there is when they finally came out with the ESV Bible. I remember that because I bought this when it first came out and I used it a lot. It was my very first ESV Bible. And I mean, there's notes in here. I started using it as a youth pastor and trying to teach from it. And I quickly realized that my students were not familiar with it and really didn't like it. And it was hard for them to navigate. And so we went back to the NIV. And then I just stopped using the ESV for a little while. Didn't have any idea of what was really going on. But that's the behind the scenes of why the ESV was written. So it really was about this idea of complementarian theology being the theology for evangelicals. It was really about a patriarchal stance. And I would even say, and I don't use this word lightly, it was a little bit of misogynistic languaging in the text to lead you to a point. And they would end up translating. And they were not like quiet about this. They weren't like sneaking it underneath. They were very loudly proclaiming this and doing this, saying this is exactly what we're doing. They would not deny it. But what they would do is they would say, this is how the text is. They came out and said, this is a word-for-word translation. This is probably the best word-for-word translation there is now in English. And it became like, this is the standard if you want to know what the actual text of the Greek says, which is a little bit disingenuous. It's kind of like, I kind of equate it to, I feel like they Obi-Wan Kenobi'd us. Like in Return of the Jedi, Obi-Wan Kenobi says to Luke, after Luke says, why didn't you tell me Darth Vader's my father? He said, well, I kind of did, but I told you the truth from my own point of view, kind of a deal, right? Like I told you the truth from a certain point of view. The translators of the ESV told us the truth from a certain point of view, as I kind of pointed out yesterday. Like they have woven their interpretation of what they believe theologically into their translation. And so if you solely just had a diet of the ESV and you just read it, you didn't have any understanding of the Greek language, couldn't go back and challenge it even or look at it, what you would end up believing and thinking is that God is a man, number one. Number two, you would believe that there's no ungendered language in the Bible. It's all gendered and it's all male-centric. And you would come up with complementarian theology, and you would lean a little more patriarchy, misogynistic, if that's all you knew. And I think that was kind of the point. And so I have a big problem with that, as I pointed out in the Greek text yesterday, because there are ambiguities gender-wise in the Greek text that in their day they used as just like generalizations in our day we would say, oh, that's not really gendered one way or another. That's just kind of, brothers and sisters, or it doesn't lend itself to this way. You have to interpret it this way. There is the feminine part of this. That's not in here, and it will not ever be in here. And so what ended up happening was in mid 2000s, like 2004, Zondervan decided to come out with their own revision kind of a deal of the NIV called the TNIV. 2005, I think it was, not 2004. They came out with the TNIV, and it was basically the opposite of the ESV. It was gender neutral. It was very female forward. It was like we wanted to make sure that women felt included in the translation of the Bible. Well, if you've been reading the ESV for a while, it was kind of like this battle started happening, and the TNIV pretty much didn't get off the ground. Like, no one really wanted it. No one, because they put it out next to the NIV on the shelf. So NIV in 1984 translated then, and then here's the TNIV, today's NIV, right next to each other. It didn't work. TNIV ended up getting phased out. They were like, this was a failed experiment. In 2011, the NIV got revised, and a lot of the stuff that was in the TNIV was then translated into the new NIV in 2011 with footnotes telling you why they translated it the way they did. And I have loved it. I loved the footnotes. I love what they were trying to do, trying to show, hey, here's the nuance of the Greek, what they were doing back then versus how we would translate this now and how we would talk about it now. But that received an enormous amount of backlash. In fact, the Center for Biblical Manhood and Womanhood came out screaming against the 2011 NIV for doing this. They're like, you can't do this, and it was like this, like, we ban the NIV, don't let anybody use the NIV, use the ESV, which shows this kind of identity politic thing going on. And so this is why I have kind of an issue with the ESV, because as I read it and then I read the Greek, I'm going, this is showing off an interpretation, not a translation. You want me to think a certain way. You don't want me to see the actual text for what it actually says and what it means in our language today. You want me to think a certain way. And so I buck against that normally in a lot of different things in my life. And so that was one of these kind of things. So that's why I kind of cringe against the ESV a lot and kind of go, I'm not sure I love that. And I don't really call it a translation. I call it an interpretation, because they want to get me to think something that maybe the text doesn't even really say. So that's the ESV. Let's put that aside. NASB. Here's the deal. Like I said, I actually love the NASB. I really, I do not hate it. I think it's a really good translation. It's a word-for-word translation. It comes from a long tradition. Okay, so if you go look up the history of it, it was the Revised Standard Version came out of England. Then the American Standard Version in the early 1900s was kind of the Americanized revision of the Revised Standard Version. And then the New American Standard in the 70s was kind of re-looked at. And then in 1995, they redid it again. And then in 2022, I think they updated it again. So here's the deal. The way that the New American Standard was put together was a team, a pretty ecumenical team. There wasn't one theology like represented amongst the whole like the ESV was. There was a bunch of different perspectives who sat around and at the table who all had really high degrees of scholarship, and they discussed the translation. And I think what we end up seeing in the NASB is we see sometimes where they compromised on certain things. And that's why I was kind of frustrated yesterday as I'm reading this, because I'm like, okay, the original NASB translates Junia as Junius. They made him a male because they couldn't translate the back end of the verse saying that they weren't an apostle. So they had to make sense of that somehow. And so they compromised and said, okay, I guess we'll make that person a male to make this sentence work. And my guess is that was not an across the board, thumbs up. It was probably kind of a back and forth argument. And then it finally was like, okay, well, this is how we'll handle this. And my guess is that when they updated it in 2022 and they decided to make Junia a female like she's supposed to be, then they had to wrestle with the back end of the sentence and go, okay, well, I'm not sure we can have her be an apostle. And so they're wrestling with this all again. And then they end up changing the back end of it to not really mean what it says in the Greek, but to help present the theology of what they think should be going on there. Which, like I said, I don't agree with everything that they do and how they translate it, because, like I showed yesterday, I was frustrated because, for the most part, I like the NASB. I think it's really a good translation. It does have more complementarian leaning, just the way it is, and that's the way it was translated. But you can see the tension sometimes in the pages, and sometimes that's a good thing. And so I just wanted to clear that up and be like, hey, I don't hate this version of the Bible. I use it often. I look at it often. It's actually a pretty good one. You just have to know that sometimes they translate things they argue within the text itself about how they translate. They see something and they go, well, that really doesn't kind of goes against what I already believe. So I got to figure out, what's wrong here, what's right here, and then they retranslate it, and that's frustrating. So anyway, my whole point of this is to try to clear up, like, if you use the NASB, awesome, love that. Just know, hopefully there's footnotes in your Bible that kind of help you understand where they made decisions. I personally, I avoid the ESV just because I know the backstory and I know how disingenuous it can feel. So just, that's my own opinion. If you have a different opinion, that's fine. And the CSB, I don't really have an opinion on. I have not studied it. I have not dove into it enough. I just know I was pretty surprised on how they translated that verse. And by the other things that I've looked at, though, I've been pretty disappointed in how they translate. So I'm not a big fan of it, but I'm not like I hate it either, kind of a deal. Okay. Yeah. So that's my take on all of that. And I hope that's the last time I have to do one of these videos. All right. Thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for letting me clear that up.